The new Liberal minority government has promised to address the housing affordability crisis as one of its first moves. But questions remain about how quickly that housing can come and what it will take to get there. Joining us now to talk about this is the CEO of one of Canada's major housing developers, Michael Waters. Michael, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
So the last Liberal government tried to deal with the housing crisis, as you know, a lofty goal to build millions of homes. What do you think has been the biggest holdup to really gaining some ground on that?
Well, housing is a very capital-intensive business. To deliver homes on the scale that Canada needs, and the gap is significant, Morella. Last year, Canada delivered 260,000 homes. Which was, a large volume. It just barely surpassed the previous peak in 1974 of 257,000 homes, but still 60,000 homes short of what we need to meet demand, and far short of what we need to fill the significant deficit in housing that already exists. Capital is critical, and so we need to find ways to attract capital to the sector to allow us to build more homes. There are a number of other barriers, of course, regulatory barriers, the levies and fees and taxes that are imposed on new housing, and myriad other issues. We have studied the Liberal platform with great interest. There are a number of factors or initiatives outlined in that platform that we think have merit. There are other areas where we think the industry will look for other initiatives from government to help us.
Okay, so let's talk about what you saw when the Liberals were out campaigning, now from the new PM, that you think could make the biggest difference. What are the one or two initiatives or promises you saw that went to you, okay, that could work?
Yeah, well, obviously, both the Conservatives and the Liberals pledged to eliminate the GST on certain forms of new housing. So certainly we welcome that initiative. We think that could make a big difference for sure. We look at other incentives. They did talk about the multi-unit residential building or MERB program, resuscitating that program from the 1970s, which certainly I think bears a lot of interest and merit. So there were a number of initiatives that they talked about, we think, that could be very helpful.
When you mentioned the 1970s initiative, how did it work? What was offered at the time for the building of these multi-unit buildings?
Well, basically, they allowed an enhanced level of tax depreciation on the construction of new multifamily buildings. And, and that really spurred the development of a significant amount of apartments at that time. In fact, as I mentioned, the previous peak for home building in Canada was in the mid-1970s. And then we entered a long period of decline following some changes to tax policy and rent control and rent regulation. And you think about that period of time, Canada's population has nearly doubled. So, really we have a significant period of gap between housing supply and housing demand.
Are we building the right kinds of homes? We're seeing the glut of condos, right? These smaller units that have come online that people aren't picking up. Are we building the right kind of homes in this country?
Well, I think, developers and builders are always seeking to meet customer demand, and demand from customers has is obviously hugely impacted by what's affordable. And, the last several years have seen affordability erode to levels we hadn't seen in generations. And certainly, the last year, as home prices and the housing market has softened, we've seen affordability improve a little bit. But it's still very, very poor. In fact, in March, RBC estimated that over 55% of average household income was required to fund the cost of home ownership. And long-term trends would suggest that figure should be closer to 40% or even lower. So what this has meant is that customers have been pushed smaller homes. You talk about condos, certainly in cities like Toronto, developers have tried to meet the customer demand by building denser forms, smaller condo units to meet that customer demand. It's whether that is what is the right kind of housing is an open question. But I think what Canadians need is homes of all descriptions. We need homes that can accommodate families, certainly students and young professionals, and every sort of home in that spectrum.
I do want to ask you about the availability of people who are skilled to build the homes. We've had a problem with that for a number of years. I know some of the provinces have offered programs to young people, right, to get into these programs to help build homes or do construction of any kind that's needed. What's your take on whether we have what we need to get some of these homes built, or do we need to fast track that even more?
It's a big concern. I mean, we talked about capital as a barrier. We talked about red tape and fees and taxes as barriers, but certainly the availability of skilled trades is a major problem. More than 20% of Canada's skilled trades are older than 55. And so obviously retirement is on the horizon for many of them. We're just not replacing them at a level that we need to build the homes that Canada needs. And so I think there is an opportunity there for policymakers to look at trades training and the funding of training, to look at certification programs, immigration policy, and other things to try and boost that pool of skilled labor that can really help Canada build those homes that we need.
Michael Waters, I'm out of time, sir. I got to leave it there. Michael is the CEO of Minto Group. Thanks very much for sharing some of your time.